Our discussion, voyeurism, pathological manifestation, peeping toms, who actually peep into bedrooms of others, sublimated forms, curiosity, everyday form, reality shows, how we like to see reality shows, how we satisfy our voyeurism. We are terribly interested in the lives of others. In mythology, we have character of Narad Muni, who always wants to know कि कहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है, what's happening where. And we have a very good example of Shunak Rishi. This is a very good mythological example. He never wanted to be this, he got into this state. So he was a person who was very intelligent, but very straightforward. So he was very knowledgeable, but people would make a fool of him. So he said to himself that I am very knowledgeable, but I can't read people's minds. So mythology tells us that he did austerities, tapasya, and he was given a boon. So he asked for a boon that I should know what is going on in the minds of others. And the boon was granted. But as he started knowing what was going in the minds of others, he became disturbed himself. He was fed up of knowing what is going on in the minds of others. But then it would not stop. Any person he meets, he would know what is in the unconscious, and that would terrify him or make him sick or make him uncomfortable. So he went back to the gods that I don't want this compulsive voyeurism. I don't want this anymore. But he was told now that the boon is granted, it cannot be taken back. So now we have to keep knowing the minds of others, no matter how traumatic. And then the story goes that somebody told him that the only way out of this is to constantly focus and recite the name of Hanuman. And he did that and came out of that compulsive voyeurism. In art, we can see voyeurism in the film Shocking. Have you seen that?
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Shocking movie. Yeah.
In that movie, it's an old movie. It is a group of friends who have become old, but they come together and they again start behaving as though they are young. And they start staring or looking at women who are beautiful, especially young women. So this is, in art, you can see that voyeurism. In James Bond, of course, the job of James Bond includes voyeurism. Narcissism, pathological manifestation, manic grandiosity, मैं ही मैं हूं, दूसरा कोई नहीं. You can see sublimated form in ideological movements, revolutionary movements, in radical leaps in science. In everyday manifestation, we can look at our own grooming, how careful we are. In mythology, we have Narcissus and Kuber. The myth of Narcissus we have discussed. The myth of Kuber is this. Kuber is supposed to be the lord of wealth in the Indian pantheon, the Hindu pantheon. The story goes that Kuber once became grandiose and egoistic about his own wealth. So he threw a party and invited all the gods to the party. And the party was thrown with such opulence that everyone was impressed. And Kuber wanted that to show to the entire universe of gods how prosperous and rich he was. But it had gone to his head. So the story tells us that Lord Ganesha also went to the party. And in order to teach Kuber a lesson, he ate up everything which was there on the menu. And then he went to Kuber and said that it is the convention that you cannot allow a guest to go back hungry. So now it's your job to satisfy my hunger because I am your guest. So Kuber provided everything he could. Lord Ganesha ate up everything. Nothing could satisfy him. And then he said, now I am going to eat you. And then Kuber ran for his life and reached Kailash. And he reached where Ganesha's parents were living. So he told this story, asked for forgiveness, and when Lord Ganesha came there, Parvati gave him a modak to eat, and that satisfied him. So this is the myth of Kuber, where his narcissism got him into grandiosity and was taught a lesson. In art, we can see James Bond, all movies, Rajnikant, where we know it is grandiose, it is manic, but because we have it in ourselves, unconscious, and we don't want to let it go, we want to live it out, but we cannot, so we live it out by identification. We pay money to satisfy our manic grandiosity by identification. Is it clear? Different manifestations of these component instincts.
Yes, sir.
Let us clear a few more concepts before we start reading Freud in original. Freud uses the word libido to mean the energy that is related with everything positive and pleasurable. And occasionally you will see that it is almost used as a synonym of life energy, although Freud denies it. So Freud uses the word libido and he uses the word aggression or aggressive instinct. So libido means the energy associated with the erotic operations. And the word erotic here is used in a wider sense. It is not just sexuality. The word eros is used as a synonym of pleasure, which includes all forms of pleasure, not just sexual pleasure. So the root word erotica is a much wider word than just sexuality. And Freud uses the word eros in the same original sense, where eros is a movement of pleasure, not just of sexuality. So Freud talks about libido as being that energy which is associated with this pleasure movement, this life movement. So everything related to survival, not survival, everything related to pleasure, everything constructive is attributed to this libido. So it's a metaphor. It's not something you can see if you take out the blood or if you take the X-ray. It's a metaphor Freud uses to describe the psychological operations. So slowly we are building up the basic vocabulary of Freud. So libido is that energy which is associated with the pleasure movement, all constructive movements in the mind. So you will see two fundamental forces in the mind, pleasure and aggression. Aggression is related to survival of the self, pleasure related to survival of the species, as well as enjoyment of the individual. Okay. So libido. From Freudian point of view, Originally, people talked of two fundamental forces in the human mind, libido and the aggressive instinct, or the pleasure force and the aggressive force. Then some people said we should add narcissism to this, that narcissism is as fundamental as libido and aggression. They are incomplete without narcissism. That we all have a love for oneself and a desire to detach from everybody and just be a self-sufficient whole. And then people added the fourth component of object relations. That we are not only we have a narcissistic tendency, we also have an object relating tendency. And you can see the opposition of the two. One brings back entire libido onto oneself, and the second throws the libido onto the object. Now, Freud uses the word libido, Jung uses the word life energy. So for Freud, this primal energy which is moving inside essentially is a pleasure energy. Whereas for Jung, it is a pure life energy, at times going into pleasure, at times going into non-pleasure, but there is one life energy which takes different flavors. It is like you can have a soda bottle and then whatever color you add, the cold drink becomes of that color. But essentially it's a soda bottle. So it's like that kind of concept in Jung, that there is a life energy flowing in the system, and when it goes for a pleasure purpose, it acquires a different flavor. When it goes for an aggressive purpose, acquires a different flavor. When it goes for self-repair purpose, acquires a different purpose. But essentially there is one flowing life energy. Obviously all of these are metaphorical concepts, part experiential, part metaphorical. Nobody has ever isolated life energy, aggression, narcissism in a test tube. So we are dealing with non-empirical metaphorical concepts which are part experiential, part metaphorical. And if you look at Jung's concept of life energy, we see equivalent in India in terms of prana. And based upon prana, we have this whole system of pranic energy, pranic healing. We have this whole system of pranayama. We have this whole system of Reiki and Tai Chi. And in China, the same prana becomes Chi. And therefore, we have the system called Tai Chi. And we have so many systems of Shaolin and other forms of martial arts which essentially leverage or work on Chi. Acupressure, acupuncture also work on this Chi. Chinese medicine also works on this Chi. So this Chi is nothing but what in Indian yogic system we call prana. And something near to that was coined by Jung called life energy, but it's not exactly like prana. There are slight differences. Someday we will discuss that. But these concepts are near to each other. Like prana and Chi are exactly the same. It is Chi is just the Chinese conversion of prana. But when we come to life energy and prana, there is a slight difference. And between libido and life energy, there is a slight difference. So near to each other concepts, but libido is more an erotic concept. Life energy is a flavorless concept which can acquire any flavor. And prana and chi, they have a different basis altogether. Although in manifesting in the human body, they become equivalent to life energy in some ways. But in the Indian system of prana and the Chinese system of chi, we talk of the chakras and the entire circulatory system of the prana, which Jung never talks about. Because we believe that just as the blood has a circulatory system, the energy also has a circulatory system. And the chakras are the coordinating centers for this energy flow. And there are pipelines called the nadis from which the energy flows. So just as a circulatory system has arteries and veins, Similarly, the energy system also has nadis. Now, this is not modern allopathic science, but this is the way Ayurveda, yoga, and the entire Eastern systems look at the human system. That they believe that the energy just does not flow haphazardly. There is a full circulatory system for energy, which coordinating centers, controlling centers called the chakras. So Freud's libido is a much smaller concept than life energy, is a much smaller concept than prana and chi, which are equivalent. Okay, so we can see this fundamental concepts. Any questions on this?
No, sir.
You can watch this. I cannot play this because of the IPR thing. You can watch them later. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's clear out a few concepts before we go into reading of Freud. This is Freud's first model of the mind called the topographical model. So this is the first model of the mind given by Sigmund Freud. We call it topographical because it classifies the mind into three compartments. The top part you can see here is the conscious mind. Below that is the pre-conscious mind. And below that is the unconscious mind. What is the conscious mind? How would you understand it?
I think day to day, what you do consciously and you are completely aware of it would come from the conscious mind.
So at this moment, the part of our mind which is engaged in this class, which knows that we are in this class, which is operating for the purpose we are here, is the conscious part of our mind. If I ask you, what did you have for dinner last night? You can easily recollect it. But you did not focus upon it till I asked you. So that information is there, that memory is there in your pre-conscious. Pre-conscious is that part of your mind which is not active but can be made active on demand. I can ask you, what dress did you wear day before yesterday? Till I ask you, you don't recollect it. But when I ask you, you can easily recollect it. So that which is not active by itself, but can be made active on demand, that is our pre-conscious mind. And below pre-conscious mind is the unconscious mind. That which cannot be made active even if we make our will to it. So if I ask you that if you have a problem, what happened to you when you were 3 years of age? More probably than not, even if you want, even if you will, you can't recollect those instances. So that information is there in your unconscious mind. You are sitting in therapy and you know that if you can express your anger and pain, you will be free from the problem. You want to express it, but you just can't. Despite your will, you can't pull it up. That is because it is in the unconscious mind where there are forces opposing your will. And more often than not, the will is defeated by these forces. That is the unconscious mind. Now you can see that there are this lower barrier, this lower border of the pre-conscious mind. This lower border acts like a repression barrier. It is called the repression barrier, meaning whatever is here in the unconscious mind, if it wants to come up, it cannot come up because at this layer, there are forces which are acting downwards to keep the material in the unconscious where it is and not allow it to go up. So these downward acting forces are the forces of repression. So at the repression barrier, which is the lower part of the preconscious, downward forces keep material which is here from coming up. So even if the material wants to come up, these forces don't allow. So there is this concept of repression barrier and the forces of repression. So in therapy, when you try to pull up something from the unconscious mind, against your will are acting these forces of repression. And it's a contest between the two. The more powerful party wins. And over a period of time, our job is to weaken these forces of repression so that the will can pull up, or the healthy part of the person can pull up the difficult material from the unconscious mind. This is the first model given by Freud, topographical model. Any questions on this?
No.
No, sir.
This was the first model given by Freud, and he said the pathological material is here. The traumatic material in the unconscious mind, mostly of early childhood, and in Freud's view, much of it with a sexual flavor. And it is from here that the pathology operates. And of course, in the early stages, he was talking about the manifestations of hysteria. That something is here in the unconscious mind, which is the cause for the hysterical problem. And why is it unconscious? Because it is associated with some effect, some feeling, which is not pleasant, and therefore we want to keep it here. Because if it was to become conscious, that process would be accompanied by pain, guilt, shame, envy, or any such unpleasant emotion, which we don't want to feel, and therefore we keep it here in the unconscious. Okay. So anything which can be painful, which can be anxiety provoking, which is unacceptable to self or society, all of that material is here. the first model, topographical model. Freud then developed the second model, which is called the structural model. And in the structural model, he brought in 3 new ideas of id, ego, and superego. Are you aware of it?
No,
No, sir,
very.
I'm not.
Sorry?
I'm not clear about it. I haven't heard about it. I don't know.
Yeah, me either. I'm not very clear.
So Freud said there are 3 parts to the human mind based upon the nature of the contents we are dealing with. So one fact he said in the first model is, in this model what he said was that we have a conscious part, a pre-conscious part, and the unconscious part. Now he said that if you look at it qualitatively, not just this is in terms of awareness, what is aware at the moment, we call it conscious. What can be brought to awareness on demand, we call it pre-conscious. What is outside of our awareness and control, we call it unconscious. But if you look at it from a qualitative standpoint, what is the material, or how does the mind operate in terms of coordination? So who is coordinating this repression barrier? And how is this repression barrier being coordinated? So from a functional point of view and from a structural point of view, Freud defined 3 entities. The first was id. Id is ID. So Freud said id is the reservoir of all instincts of pleasure and aggression and everything else. So there is a part of the mind, Freud said, where all the desires, moral or immoral, real or imaginary, acceptable or unacceptable, known to us or unknown to us, there is a storehouse of all desires. It's like a cauldron. It's like a volcano inside the earth. There is a part of the mind where you have all our desires and all our aggression, and there is no logic, or there is no, this is not an area of mind which is operating completely on logic or morality. So all desires, moral or immoral, realistic or imaginary, sane or insane, all these desires, fears, aggression, envy, shame, guilt, all of this is together, right, in one part of the mind called the id. So id is the reservoir of primitive instincts, primitive desires, emotions, ideas, where there is no place for reality and morality in the sense there is in the conscious mind. So this is not a place where reality and morality are governing the place. So id is the reservoir of instincts, desires, fears, all sorts of emotions, all sorts of memories, all sorts of unprocessed materials. So this is the id. Now the id represents almost the animal in man. So there would be an animal in every man. Freud often used to say that civilization is only skin deep. You scratch the surface and the animal comes out roaring. So the animal part of man, so to say, is in the id. Exactly opposite to it is our morality, which prescribes 2 things. thou shall and thou shall not. So that part Freud calls superego, which is exactly opposite to id, the storehouse of morality, thou shall not. The ideal part of man, the saintly part of man, the godlike part of man. And coordinating between these opposites as well as coordinating with the reality outside is the agent of reality called the ego. Ego creates the compromise between the id, the superego, and the outside world. Because if you allow id to operate uncontrolled, our survival would be in danger. And if everyone does it, we can never enter into civilization, we'll always remain savages. So civilization presupposes attenuation and control of the id. So ego is the agency, which is the agent of reality, the practical compromise maker, which sort of accommodates the id, accommodates the superego in some proportion and allows us to tune with the reality outside so that our survival is ensured and we can maximize our pleasure without any danger. At the same time, we can be as moral as we can be. So ego is the compromise creator, the coordinator. So Freud says that if you put all of them together, you get this. He says the id is completely in the unconscious, but the ego and superego both are partly conscious, partly unconscious. So at times we have a desire which is not acceptable to society. We think over it and we let it go. We don't act on that desire. That is the conscious part of ego. At times, a desire unacceptable to us or society arises in the unconscious, and the part of ego which is in the unconscious represses it right there. It never comes to our awareness. So part of the ego is conscious, part of the ego is unconscious. Similarly, part of the superego is conscious. That yesterday was Shivratri, so I felt I should donate something to somebody. That is the conscious part of the superego of doing good. At the same time, I may have some thought in my unconscious mind which is against my beliefs, maybe religious beliefs, maybe ideological beliefs, maybe value beliefs, and that would be repressed by my superego in the unconscious itself. So it would never come up. So ego and superego both are partly conscious, partly unconscious. At times they work consciously. At times they work in the unconscious. We don't even know that they have operated. And something has happened in the unconscious which we don't even know what has happened. So this is called the second model of the mind given by Freud, called the structural model of the mind. So we have three agencies here, the id, the ego, and the superego. Any questions here?
No, sir.
No.
So how would pathology develop in your view if you look at this model? If there is a very strong desire in the id, and the superego is also very strong, and it puts it down there, it can result in a drive frustration. and pathology can develop. Second, the ego may be weak and ego is not able to operate its defenses or do its work in the unconscious mind, and therefore something that is successfully repressed in the unconscious in the normal person comes out in a sick person because of weakness of the ego. That the ego is not able to do its work in the unconscious. Or the superego is hyper strong, that the guilt is so strong that in the unconscious mind, even if you do something slightly wrong, the punishment is so harsh that it becomes a pathology. And this we call superego pathology. Pathology because of excessively strong superego. So this is the way that when these three, ego and superego, they are not working in the optimum way, something can go wrong. Id being too strong, superego being too strong, superego being too weak, ego being too weak. So ego is the agent of reality, the practical man in us. So there is an animal in us, a saint in us, and a practical man in us who creates a compromise of these two and the environment outside. A very important function of ego is adaptation to the environment. So ego has not only to look inside but also outside. So has to create a sustainable, adaptive, functioning compromise between various parts of the psychic system and the environment. That's a very important function of the ego. So this word ego is used very differently than colloquial usage. In colloquial usage, we use the word ego as synonym of pride. But this is not the way in which Freud uses the word ego. He uses the word as a coordinator, as agent of reality, as that part of the mind responsible for adaptive management of inside and the environment outside to ensure reality adaptation. Any questions on this? Okay, the meeting is getting over. I'll send you a new link.